This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome to the Marvel Age Masterclass podcast with host Ben Morse. Episode 16, 1970 Part 2, with guest Russell Sellers.
And welcome back to another installment of the Marvel Age Masterclass podcast. Give you a little behind the scenes here. First of all, I'm Ben Morse, former editorial director of digital media at Marvel Entertainment, current visiting lecturer at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And as we speak, I am in, full disclosure, the Green Valley Ranch parking lot here in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, actually in Henderson, Nevada. Real quick, I couldn't podcast in my backyard today because it's too hot. It's scorching hot here in Vegas. My daughter is trying to sleep inside the house, so I'm in the car, but I had to roam a little while to try to find some Wi-Fi. Who's been patient with me through this whole process? Why, it's none other than Russell Sellers.
I am nothing if not patient and passive-aggressive in my responses.
Oh, good. I can't wait for that. That's going to be really exciting as we delve into the world of 1970 Marvel Part 2. In case this is your first episode listening to Marvel Age Masterclass, well, first of all, go listen to Marvel Age Podcast right here on Place to Be Nation. Pop! That's where Russell and his compatriots in the Sarcastic Four go year by year, taking a look at the best, the brightest, the worst, the weirdest, everything to come out of the House of Ideas, Marvel Comics, starting in 1961, and at this point, all the way up into 1970, Russell.
Yes, we have finally gotten into another decade, and what a journey has been so far. The 60s had a lot of cool, weird, and just fun stuff for us to discover. It was the first time reading a lot of it for us. And here in 1970, we've already discovered that it's actually starting off on a pretty good note, though there are still some hangers-on from the 60s that should have probably been left in the last decade, but we'll get to that later.
We certainly will get to that, but I mean, it's interesting because 1970 is the year we start. I mean, we've already started in the late 60s seeing kind of the godfathers of the Marvel Universe, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, step away from their properties that they helped to create and imagine. But now we're really seeing a dramatic shift. Like, for instance, on this episode, we're going to talk about Kirby's last issues of Fantastic Four as Kirby's basically phasing out and Stan Lee's not far behind him. So we're starting to get some of these new voices we've been promised. Roy Thomas, obviously the most prevalent of the new voices. A lot of new artists, a lot of good art we can discuss this episode. But you know, it's interesting to see it shift from basically on a few guys' backs to now being very much a corporate-driven company where you're just plugging in guys to keep the ongoing stories. But interesting to me is that, you know, when you first started out, you really had to have Lee and Kirby at the wheel because they're the only ones who understood these characters. Now, we're getting into a generation of guys and girls who have not grown up, but certainly experienced years of Lee and Kirby, so they can kind of put their own take on it.
Absolutely. You're seeing certain writers coming into their own as well, like Roy Thomas finally seeming to find his own voice on a couple of titles, and the Buscemas coming in to really start taking on a lot of the workload, as well as for my money, Gil Kane finally seeming to really start to come into his own and start to really stand out as an artist as Kirby is transitioning away. So
right.
There's a lot of talent in the bullpen, and they're really now starting to step forward and take their shots.
Yeah, it's an interesting domino effect in the sense that Kirby leaves Fantastic Four, so we get John Romita on Fantastic Four for at least the short-term time being, and that leaves an opening on Amazing Spider-Man where, as you said, Gil Kane steps in and, for my money, delivers the best Gil Kane art we've seen. And I can say that,
yes.
having also recently re-experienced some of his old Green Lantern stuff, which is good, but Spider-Man's a character that really works for him. And why don't we start by talking about Amazing Spider-Man? Because I would argue, Russell, it's the strongest material detail that we read for this episode. So I think it makes to start with Amazing Spider-Man. And let's start with the transition from Romita to Gil Kane. It's not as jarring as I expected it would be, just because I'm thinking of Gil Kane on Green Lantern. I'm thinking of Gil Kane on Captain Mar-Vell, just being kind of very extreme artists. And I wasn't sure how that would translate to, I knew it would work fine on Spider-Man, but I was a little concerned on how it would translate to the Peter Parker and the Gwen Stacy of it all. But he really steps in, and it feels like he's right at home working on this book.
It's more suited to his style, but he does, I think, get a big assist from John Romita, who is still inking the book. Yeah. But Gil Kane seems more focused and seems like more intent on keeping that almost Marvel, I hate to call it a house style that's kind of established on Spider-Man, but that's really the wheelhouse he seems to be in. Like there's a pocket that John Romita kind of took from Steve Ditko whenever he came onto the book, and Gil Kane keeps that going, but also puts a little bit of his own flair on things, and to me makes him stand out as this like truly great and like kind of prolific Spider-Man artist that maybe should be in the greater conversation of all-time best Spider-Man artists.
What stands out to me about Kane's work on Spider-Man, Russell, is that he kind of takes the best of both worlds that have come before him. And what I mean by that is Steve Ditko had kind of a weird otherworldly style to him. And I think it worked really well on Spider-Man, the character, just because, he's by nature, he's kind of a creepy figure. He's contorting into all these bizarre positions. Mm-hmm. He's not your traditional barrel-chested Superman type superhero. But where Ditko was sometimes an odd fit was on the personal stuff. It worked in the beginning because Peter was in high school, and, what's more awkward than high school? So the fact that he looked like this gangly, nerdy freak was fine. But then as we moved into Peter Parker, the college years, you got John Romita drawing almost like a heightened Archie comic when it came to the supporting cast. But it was beautiful. I mean, his women were gorgeous. His guys looked like real teenagers. And I would say that his Spider-Man was fine, but I would almost say the only weakness I see in John Romita Sr.'s game is his Spider-Man did look like every other superhero. It did look a little more generic. It wasn't as unique as Ditko's. With Kane, I almost feel like, and you're right, it's a big assist to Romita on the inks, but I feel like we're getting back to that strangeness of Ditko on the Spider-Man side, but retaining kind of the welcoming supporting cast vibe of Romita on the other side.
I'd say that's fair. Like Gil Kane's facial features, like the just the way he can draw the emotions happening on characters' faces, is probably the strongest thing he brings to the table here. It feels like he's almost a perfect marriage between John Romita Sr. and Jack Kirby. He finds a way to take these two styles, mesh them in a way that makes it even friendlier to the reader than either of those two styles individually.
What's interesting, dude, is that it's public knowledge that basically at some point a lot of artists were instructed to, you referred to the house style earlier, but the house style of Marvel in the 60s was essentially Kirby. People were told to draw more like Kirby. Mm-hmm. The only, I would say the big exception to that is I do feel like John Romita had his own style. He was, lent something to Kirby, and he does a fantastic Kirby imitation on Fantastic Four this year, but he did have a little more stuff to him. What's interesting to me is you never saw Ditko replicated. You never really saw any sort of direction of, in those early days of, all right, let's make sure you draw more like Ditko. Like even looking at the more outsized guys like Steranko or like Neil Adams, they had their own style. And if anything, they borrowed somewhat from Kirby, but it was basically either you were a Kirby clone or you were your own thing. But despite the fact Ditko was such a founding father of the Marvel Universe, it says something, I think, to how unique he was, that he wasn't more influential.
Yeah, I'm looking at this art again, just kind of pulling the issues up and just getting reacclimated to Gil Kane. And pretty much everything about this is, kind of like peak classic 70s Marvel to me. Like this sets your template. This is where I think a lot of artists are going to look back and say, this is the most influential stuff on me personally. Like, you can see a lot of modern sensibilities in this, stuff that artists today are even like trying to replicate, or at least taking some influence from. I mean, I can see this art specifically in like one of the last issues, the actual Death of Captain Stacy issue, influencing everyone from Greg Capullo to Patrick Gleason. They both, like those two artists specifically, is what it kind of sets my mind to.
So you said it earlier, but just to put it on the record, are we in agreement that Gil Kane may be one of the more underappreciated talents of this era? Oh,
I think there's no question. Especially looking at his Amazing Spider-Man work, all it really took was Gil Kane needed to find his voice on the title that was right for him. Along comes Amazing Spider-Man, and once again, Amazing Spider-Man proves to be the MVP of Silver Age Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fantastic Four came out of the gate with a lot of power and energy, but Spider-Man, I had this conversation with Tom Brevoort recently, actually, saying how Fantastic Four has the bigger moments, but Spider-Man, pound for pound, is more consistent. Like, when Fantastic Four is great, when it hits like a Galactus Saga or a Doctor Doom, that's all-time stuff. But Spider-Man, month in and month out, what we've seen from reading it through the last 9 to 10 years is it's never bad. It's always at least baseline good. Even if it's a lame villain, even if it's a stupid plot, you still get some good Peter Parker stuff. A lot of the villains are really fun. It's just, and I think that lends to Gil Kane finding a home on a consistently good, well-written, because I do think Spider-Man was probably Stan's best written book. You could maybe argue that FF, the collaboration, is stronger just because you have Kirby doing his biggest stuff, same as Thor. You have Stan doing the whole Shakespearean deal and Kirby really knocking it out of the park with big cosmic concepts. But as far as day in, day out writing, I think Stan's best stuff, aside from Silver Surfer, is on Spider-Man.
Absolutely agree. Like, I think that for me, it's Thor, Silver Surfer. Those are like Stan at his like cosmic peak.
Right.
He really gets it with those two titles. And those are two titles that fully embrace what they are and never really stray from that too much. And both titles also allow their respective artists to just unleash. And that's what I truly love about both of those books. They're also just written in a way that, you can fully accept very quickly. Like, it feels like it could be dropped into the modern day and it still works. And Amazing Spider-Man is kind of the converse of that, I guess, is maybe the term I'm looking for, because he's a street-level character. He's very grounded, very earth-based, and yet, one of the things I love about the dialoguing of Amazing Spider-Man from the 60s all the way through the 70s is that even with some of the outdated slang that's used, it still comes across as very genuine and something that I feel has a timeless authenticity to it that will grab you no matter what generation you're coming from. So that's why this works, and it's the emotional beats that Stan really zeroes in on, especially on these issues that we read, Amazing Spider-Man 88 through 91 in this second part of 1970. Not, as you pointed out before, not all of the Spider-Man stuff has really worked on Amazing Spider-Man. There have been times whenever it's eye roll inducing at how silly or just like not well conceived it is, but you never lose the Peter Parker of it all. And that's what makes the book really sing. And it's these issues 88 through 91 that give you not only like one of the most amazingly illustrated Doc Ock and Spider-Man fights that has ever been, but the emotional impact of the death of Captain Stacy, a character who I would argue has not really had all that much development in these pages, but he's just kind of been a consistent, almost like older father figure, or somebody who's like observing Peter and dropping little advice here and there whenever he would need it. But the emotional attachment to that character has been established. So whenever he dies in issue, I believe it is issue 91, it's issue 90 that he actually dies in. That is a hard-hitting moment and one of the absolute pinnacles of this book for me.
I'd agree, man. And I think it's not about, with Captain Stacy, I think less is more almost. I think if we had been beaten over the head with the fact, like, this is Peter Parker's new father figure, and, you know, he's in every issue, he's getting a lot of screen time, he's bonding with Peter a lot, it almost would have felt like too much, too heavy-handed. But because he was what you described, he was a solid background player, but what he meant to the dynamic, the fact that he was something of a father figure to Peter, but more importantly, how much he meant to Gwen. Like, to me, the death of Captain Stacy is less about Peter and Captain Stacy's relationship, if that makes sense. It's more about the fact that they've done such a good job, and this is something I've really seen in this reread, is really come to appreciate Gwen Stacy a lot more. It's just such a great character and such a fully realized love interest, and so different from a Lois Lane or your classic DC love interest. She's likable.
And she's different even from prior Spider-Man love interests.
From the Betty Brant and that of the world, yeah.
Yeah, Gwen has something, as we pointed out on the show, they're finally giving one of Peter's love interests actual agency. This is something that Betty Brant did not get. Pretty much,
Liz Allen?
Yeah, Liz Allen. None of them had anything like this. None of them had any character development outside of their relationship with Peter. Here, you're getting Gwen having her own story. Like, she's got her own things happening that are outside of the purview of Peter Parker. And her relationship with her dad was a really important thing for her story, for developing her out as a character. And by adding that to her story, I think that it really allowed them to expand her character in a way that had not really been done up to this point in Marvel. So it's a pretty revolutionary time for superhero love interests, where we're getting a character who feels more fully formed, who actually feels like somebody that you care about and you want to see good things happen to.
And the thing is, at this point, Gwen and her family, her relationship with her dad, have almost been kind of like, that's a safe place that Peter can retreat to. No matter what's going on in his life as Spider-Man, or even the tragedies he's faced in his own personal life, Gwen is safety for him, and she's stability. She is a warm, comforting figure who, at the end of the day, no matter how much Jonah Jameson's railing against him, no matter how hard it is fighting the Green Goblin, he can come home to Gwen Stacy and feel good. And now all of a sudden that's been threatened. And it's been threatened not just by anything, but by his life as Spider-Man. And I think that's what makes it so jarring, is the fact that his life as Spider-Man has now taken away from him that one area of peace he had in Gwen and in Gwen's relationship with her father. Now Gwen has almost been corrupted by the life of Spider-Man. She now has a personal connection to Spider-Man, and something, again, great power comes great responsibility. That responsibility he's bearing affects his relationship with Gwen, which to this point we hadn't really seen.
Absolutely, and that's what really hooked me into these issues. I mean, I love the fight scene and everything. I think that it's ringing, and also one of those examples of I can completely skip every line of dialogue within the scenes and still get exactly what's going on. It's not until we get to all the Peter Parker stuff, all the Gwen and Captain Stacy moments, where I start like re-engaging with what's being written on the page and finding myself just completely drawn into it because this is so incredibly well done.
I agree.
And it's something that I don't think I can stamp a big enough recommendation on, but it's built, as we have been kind of alluding to, it's built on the strength of everything that's come before it. So all of that stuff that maybe wasn't quite as like fully engaging or as entertaining as what this turns out to be, I think that this is elevated because of all of the building blocks that have come before.
100%. I think Amazing Spider-Man is a book you need to read from the start. And look, we're 8-9 years in at this point, and it hasn't let us down yet. And I think another interesting thing to note is something we've been critical of Stan and of Mar-Vell on for these first decade has been the weaker female characters. The fact that your Sue Richards, your Jean Greys, your Scarlet Witches, they're just not, your Wasps, they're just not as strong as the male characters, and they're so diminished sometimes. So it's interesting to see that it's the non-powered supporting cast of Spider-Man, because I'll put Mary Jane up there as a strong character as well. I think Gwen is a step ahead of her right now, but they've got so much more to them than their super-powered counterparts, which is really interesting. It just speaks to what Stan liked to write. Yeah,
and I mean, of those names of like actual like strong female characters, I would throw Carol Danvers in and with that as well. Characters who are bigger or beyond the purview of their male leads. So that's some good. Like, there are good examples in there, and even Sue Richards gets a couple of moments here and there where she steps out on her own and shows that she really does belong in this pantheon. She is as integral a member of all of this as anyone. So it's inconsistent, but it is there, and you can kind of see like the building blocks of a modern Marvel universe are very much being put in place. So you can see what kind of shoulders the current crop of creators are standing on, and there's a lot to love here, and there's still room for improvement.
I think it's interesting to maybe tackle the issue of we kind of, or at least I was guilty of thinking, oh, maybe Stan just can't write female characters early on. I wonder how much of it was Stan's inability to write female characters and how much of it was just the marketplace that they were catering to. The fact that it was probably a lot of young boys reading, and they knew that they weren't really ready for strong female characters. Because I think what we see here is that Stan has the ability to write strong female characters. Just for whatever reason, in those first 5 years of the Marvel Universe, it wasn't a priority.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot to be said for that. I think that it's maybe a combination of things. No one single issue is the cause of the problem. So it's going to be lots of factors falling into that. But I mean, that's a whole other podcast that we could spend like hours analyzing.
Like a whole series of podcasts.
Yeah.
And you and I have enough podcasts on our plate right now.
God, yes.
So let's segue from Spider-Man. I'm not even going to get into the fact that I don't really like Doc Ock. I think that's for another day. I had in my notes mentioned that you don't like Doc. You know what? I don't want to go off on that tangent right now. I'll say this. I think he's much more interesting visually at this point in 1970 than he is as a character. That will change. He will get more depth to him. But we've said a lot about Spider-Man. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other titles that were featured in 1970. And specifically, I want to talk about Fantastic Four. Okay. Which we get to experience with a kind of cool story where Magneto comes in, manipulates Namor a little bit. We have a war between Atlantis and the surface world to an extent. The FF come in. But really, all the story stuff is secondary to the fact that this is the end of the Lee-Kirby collaboration. Romita steps in, does his best, I think does admirable work in telling a really good Fantastic Four story. But just what are your thoughts, Russell, as someone who's experiencing this for the first time? Because you've not read Fantastic Four prior to this podcast, right?
No, I have very rarely experienced much of the FF. Certainly not any of the 60s, 70s stuff. My Fantastic Four encounters have all been largely in the modern context, like from the 90s forward.
Okay. So let's put it on you for a sec then. As someone who has now come a decade into watching Lee and Kirby and kind of getting acquainted with Fantastic Four, what do you think of the disillusion of this team? And I think you guys touched on it on Marvel Age, but I want to dive a little deeper here. The fact that it really, just because of the nature of the business at the time, like if this were today, if this happened today and Lee and Kirby did 102 issues together and then Kirby left, even if he was leaving for DC, you know they would make a big deal out of it. You know, they would say this is Kirby's last issue to be a thing. But because it was a different time and business was done, he really just quietly shuffles off. And he's there one issue and he's gone the next. How did that make you feel just witnessing the transition?
Honestly, it is a little odd. I mean, John Romita picks up as fine because he is a fine artist, but you know, it just, I don't know. To me, it kind of felt like Kirby and Lee were reaching an endpoint. Like just knowing what we know about history between these two, it felt like maybe he wasn't quite as there as he once was. At least to me, like it kind of felt like maybe Lee and Kirby weren't quite on the same page as much anymore. So these issues, while certainly solid, like certainly good storytelling going on, also felt like they were a bit drawn out, like they were trying to find a way to keep it going, but maybe in the end they just had to realize, there's nothing left here.
I don't know if it's too on the nose, but like given what we know now, and I think it would have been fascinating again if this took place in modern times, because you know, with social, we would know so much more about what happened between these two. At this point, it's really, you know, all that speculation. You have interviews they both did years later. They contradict themselves all the time. It's the stuff of legend when it comes to comic books. But really, the way you just described it, I mean, for better or worse, it feels like you're witnessing your parents' divorce. It's like they're trying to keep it together for the kids, which in this case is Fantastic Four. And, you know, they're trying to do things that a few years ago were great, but it's clear they don't have the passion for one another that they once did. And that's how I felt about not just this last Lee Kirby issue of Fantastic Four, but really the last couple of years of the Lee Kirby Fantastic Four. It feels like Kirby does not necessarily want to be there so much anymore. He wants to be doing other stuff. It's evident with how much energy he puts into Thor. And I think Stan's just kind of going through the motions of trying to keep Kirby happy by giving him the same stuff he's been giving him for 8 years, but it's just not working.
That's a lot of it. I feel like, you know, like you were saying, that Kirby is ready to move on. He has got other things that he wants to do, other ideas, and being, you know, for lack of a better term, stuck on Fantastic Four makes it feel like he's just in that same pocket over and over and over again. And, you know, there are only so many ways you can do the same thing. So yeah, I got that feeling. I just got that sense from reading these issues that Kirby was for sure ready to go do something else, be that some other title with Marvel, or maybe as we now know, like going over to DC to try and do something like inventive, or almost like, I guess he was going to try and reinvent the wheel with some of his other ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting. We think about, again, I'm putting the modern context on it, but artists don't stay on comics these days for hundreds of issues. There's the rare exception. There's your Mark Bagley on Ultimate Spider-Man. There's your Eric Larson on Savage Dragon. But for the most part, these guys and girls are just like, you know, I've drawn 25 Doctor Doom stories. I don't want to draw 26. I want to do something else. You see them switched up. There's a reason that Marvel and DC have whole departments developed for talent management at this point. It's to make sure that their talent is constantly engaged. Now, I don't love the whole strategy of, you know, artists doing 6 issues and then leaving, which we tend to see a lot. these days. But I do appreciate the fact that if someone gets a good 3, 4, or even 2-year run in, it's okay to shift them to something else just to keep them creatively fresh and engaged. And I think had there been a talent management department at Mar-Vell in the late 60s, early 70s, certainly they would have done their best to redirect Kirby somewhere else. They would have tried to find him something he hadn't done yet so he could scratch that creative itch. But as you said, at some point, I think he felt like, you know what, I've done all I can do here. It's time to go create something else.
And I think that's fair for Kirby to have felt that way, because he put in more than enough time on Fantastic Four, and that's his legacy is cemented. He could walk away from the book at that point, and I think that the best thing to do would be to get experimental, try new things, go make something that you've had in the back of your head, or like take it over to the distinguished competition and see if they want to play around with some of the ideas that maybe Stan balked at. And there was nothing stopping him. So that was the positive side of it all. I guess the negative is just how unceremonious his exit really is, because it just ends, and he's like you were saying, he's on one issue, and then you go to the very next one, and Kirby's not here. Maybe he's just taking an issue break or something. I mean, he's been at it consistently for this long, but then he's gone. He's not coming back.
One of the greatest what-ifs in comics history, what if Marvel had tried to keep Kirby? Because they don't know if it's tired, but it seems like the relationship was so tense by the time he walked that there was no path other than him going to DC and doing For New Gods, everything there. But I wonder if there's a universe where Marvel says to Kirby, okay, we know you're a little on Fantastic Four, we know you're tired of working with Stan, but you're valuable enough that we're going to give you want to see here. That would essentially, few years down the line, the most second card concept that are still amazing. But what if Darkseid was a Marvel character? Like, it's not an impossible thing to think about, because if they had just said, all right, Chuck, we're going to let you do your own books, we just want you to stay here at Marvel and be happy, they've been very different.
Things could have gone very differently. I mean, there's a lot of fun to play around with the what-if scenarios. I mean, that's certainly Marvel's thing. They've done some really great what-if stuff over the years, and that's one I would be very curious to see how that might have worked out. Or, what, in my mind, if Jack Kirby had stayed at Marvel, he probably wouldn't have been best served staying on Fantastic Four. I think let him leave Fantastic Four. Let him not work with Stan so much anymore. Let him go work with Roy Thomas or somebody else that could give him that creative outlet that he was really looking for. And I think there were a lot of opportunities for him that maybe could have been explored a little bit deeper. I wouldn't have suggested putting him back over on X-Men or something, because he had already taken his swing at that, and to me it was just okay. But when it comes to Thor, he was really great. And I don't know, to me, I would like to have seen a little bit more there, but he had to do what was right for him, and this was his exit, and it, for better or worse, it's still quite the legacy he leaves behind. He just didn't go out with the big bang that maybe we would love to have seen.
Right, and it's going to be interesting to, like I keep alluding to, he'll be back. We'll see more of him on Marvel Age and on this show. But let's wrap up Fantastic Four real quick. For me, there's not a lot of character stuff to touch on. You actually alluded to it. There are some nice Richard moments, some nice Crystal moments, but every time they take one step forward, I feel like they take 3 steps back. They will do something cool with their powers and then immediately be put back into submission by her are just captives so the guys can fight for them. Crystal will do something incredible, and then Johnny will tell her to stay behind quarters. So the rich character development's not taking place there. But the other thing I'll say that stuck out to me about the few issues was, and I think I'm gonna disagree with Tim Capel on this, and I apologize, Tim, is I'm just not a fan of Silver Age Stan Lee written Magneto as just kind of the megalomaniac of the week. Give me the more complex, nuanced, layered Magneto that I feel like we were starting to get from Roy Thomas, that we would certainly get developed by other writers. I know Stan created Magneto, but I think he just views him as another stock villain, and that's never more readily apparent than in this story. So I'm ready for Magneto to pass into, there's a bunch of characters, so I'm ready to kind of pass into new hands, and I mean Magneto is one of them.
I would agree with that. I think I kind of disagreed with Tim's take on this version of Magneto. I prefer him to be more like what we saw in those brief Neil Adams issues of X-Men. That was much closer to the Magneto that I enjoy, that I prefer. This version of him really felt weird to me. The whole war between Atlantis and the surface world, this is something that honestly a lot of writers are going to come back to over the years, and not just at Marvel. They're going to do it at DC too. And it feels like everybody's going to put their own spin on this particular riff, but you have to have a really interesting villain at the heart of all this. And this take on Magneto, I'm agreeing with you here. This is not it. Though his conflict with Namor does make it more interesting, and makes it, I guess, a more engaging read than it would have been if Namor had been like the same version of him that we saw back in the early days of Fantastic Four, when he was almost a mustache-twirling villain. But now he's gotten a ton of development over the course of all these issues. So now he's a lot of fun to read, and I think he would be a great foil for Magneto. Just needs more nuance in the Magneto, I think.
Right. Well, it feels like if you're gonna make Magneto just another villain, then use somebody else, create somebody new, or use one of your villains with less potential. I think at this point, like you alluded to, Roy Thomas and Neil Adams gave us a glimpse of what Magneto could be. So let's see more of that. Make him more of a three-dimensional Dr. Doom type villain, less of a two-dimensional, I would almost shudder to say, like Red Skull type villain, or Mandarin, where they're bad guys, and there's nothing to them beyond them being bad guys. But I agree with you also that I think Namor shines in this issue, and clearly he's one of those characters. Stan, I think, excels at writing those characters who are kind of on the line between good and evil, and very self-interested, and their self-interest kind of defines their morality, which ironically would have made a great writer on the more evolved version of Magneto, but for whatever reason he chooses not to go there.
Yeah, I am totally with you on every bit of that.
Yeah. And, the stuff on Fantastic Four, to me, the creative stuff at this point is more interesting than the character stuff. The character stuff's great, but it's the same stuff we've been seeing for years. So we'll see if once we get, like I said, some new voices in here, we get some new stuff with the characters. That said, I want to jump over to another book, that being Captain America. And what's interesting to me, Russell, is when last I engaged with you and your group on Captain America, it was me defending a group of issues that you guys disliked, that being the saga that introduced the Falcon. And then you guys seemed to dig this particular run of Captain America issues. I was not so high on it. I did not love this take on Captain America, but I will say, listening to Marvel Age podcast, which all of you, of course, should, you guys kind of won me over on this interpretation of Captain America. I have very conflicted feelings. Basically, the stuff is the idea that I forget which one of you it was who compared it to Easy Rider, but I just saw Easy Rider for the first time in my my 70s film and society class that I took this semester. So when whoever said that nailed it, I was like, oh, that's it. Cap is Easy Rider. He's going out and he's discovering America. And that made it a little more palatable to me because it felt to me outside of that, because the thing that didn't work for me was Cap talking like he was Daredevil, making quips and stuff like that. I guess I'm just so used to kind of straightly Steve Rogers. And I know some people love when Cap loosens up a bit. Me, I'm kind of like, you know what? That's what makes him stand out in the Marvel Universe, is he's the one guy who's not cracking wise every few seconds. But whatever, I said a lot there. I want to let you respond and kind of give your take on what you thought of these Captain America issues.
I'm of two minds about these issues, and I think I alluded to that on the actual on the Marvel Age podcast, that there are things I really love about this. The Easy Rider style Captain America, which I believe it was Todd that called it out as that.
He would be the one.
Absolutely good call, and certainly makes these issues more palatable, makes them more entertaining. I'm kind of with you on that. I think that this version of Cap was just a little too quick.
I agree.
That was the only problem. I don't have a problem with quippy Cap. I'm good with that. I have a problem with it whenever it felt out of balance. So,
I just don't like when he sounds like everybody else. That's my problem.
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm at. Is like it was not balanced with the more straight laced good soldier version of Captain America. I think it needed just a little more nuance. I mean, it's a key word, nuance, and it needed a little bit more of that, and it would have been a lot better. So the real issues, as this particular part, the Cap on Campus part anyway, is the dialogue. I mean, it just needs a little editing, a little toning down, and it would have been fine. In fact, it probably would have been great. The whole using Bucky to manipulate Cap, that's something that I'm always pretty much here for. I loved the aspect of this up until we get the reveal. Once it's revealed how this was being done, it all felt like, wow, there are way too many ingredients in stew. We are trying incredibly too hard to make this story work when it was working just fine when it was much simpler. You could have just kept going with your very basic concept, and you could have even revealed, had a similar reveal to who or what this Bucky imposter actually is. I probably would have accepted it, but once you start factoring in so many players into the game, it loses something. It gets diluted. Like your whole story is now, just too convoluted for your concept. So a good idea that felt like it was just a little overcooked, and they got something with it, though. There is something here. There's a good story in there that, much like certain things on Avengers, just isn't prepped right. It's not prepared just right. But I get the idea of what they were trying to do. Just needed some clearer thought, and maybe not try to throw so much in all at one time. Simpler is better.
I think there was a good, simple plot going on here. The political stuff, great. The Cap discovering America stuff, great. Even Cap Bucky conflict and Cap's lingering to there's something interesting there. But it really collapses under its own weight. And again, I had the experience of, look, there's some characters I want Stan Lee to write forever. I would be fine with Stan never leaving Spider-Man. I would be fine with him sticking around on Silver Surfer. I even think he's still got something to say on Fantastic Four, maybe with a different artist. But when it comes to Captain America, I feel like Stan has said what he needed to say with Cap, and it's time to bring in some fresh blood. It's time to bring in, frankly, some younger voices who have an interesting Cap story to tell, to do with kind of the stuff that Stan's dipping into with the politics and with the reaction to the college-age crowd. But I want someone who's really of that generation to be able to give me a different and exciting take on Captain America. To me, this 1970 version with Stan and with Gene Colan, who this was not, to me, his strongest work. This is just something I'm not there for. I really had very little time for these issues of Captain America we read in 1970, and I'm ready for a refresh on this character.
Same. I could go for a lot more political intrigue and espionage, Captain America, and a lot less let's make a convoluted clone or robot plot.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page, and we'll see if we're on the same page for these remaining books. I wanted to say before we go there, though, Russell, do we want to take a quick break and talk about what's going on around Place to Be Nation?
Sure. I can tell you all about some of the stuff that people need to be checking out on the PTBN pop feed. This past week, it was, of course, another really busy one. As everybody, I think, in the world knows by now that Avengers Endgame is out. And we've got 2 review shows that covered it. We've got one featuring the hard-traveling fanboys of Greg and Nick. They're joined by my cohort on the Sarcastic Four, Tim Capel, as well as his cohort on Talkin' Pop, Miss Jennifer Smith. And, of course, my other co-host, one of my all-time favorite people, Mr. Sam Neely, who co-hosts 90 to Nothing with me here on the Pop feed, all talking kind of a group therapy session about Avengers Endgame, and it is heavy on the spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, you're one of the few, but go to it and then go listen to the great therapy session, and also give a listen to Mr. Andy Atherton and Miranda Berthold giving their thoughts on a separate Avengers Endgame review. Speaking of Andy, he also had a new episode of Looking Forward, Looking Back. He welcomed in like a huge panel for which I took part in to look at the upcoming summer movie season. We talked a little bit of Endgame there, of course, prior to us having actually seen it. I also have a new episode, the penultimate episode of DC Post-Crisis Management. That one's out there now, where Stephen Ferrari of the Casual Geekery joined me to talk the Dark Side War and DC Universe Rebirth #1. The NBA team are digging into round 2 of the NBA playoffs. One of my other Mar-Vell Age cohorts and the manager of PTBN Pop, the owner of PTBN Pop, if we're going to get real, Todd Weber, continues to review the last season of Game of Thrones in latest installment of Binge Please. That's a really fun show. Recommend everybody go check that out. Cowboy and D'Amato are back with a new This Week in Sports. They're breaking down the NFL draft and round 2 of the NBA playoffs. Hard Traveling Fanboys, they're back and joined by the manager, Todd Weber. They're going off the page and reliving the old Shazam TV show. If you guys haven't ever watched that, go get on DC Universe right now. It's hilarious. And, of course, Steve and Kelly are back. They're talking Bewitched and Natalie Imbruglia on Songs with Friends #26. That's going to be that's one you guys just got to go listen to. Get that nostalgia button punched real hard. But there's a big thing happening with the Hard Traveling Fanboys. Everybody needs to know about this because at the end of May, they're going to be wrapping up the Hard Travelers for Hire series, which has been a comprehensive look at every movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And they've looked at all of them so far and just wrapped it up with their big review of Endgame. So to wrap up this whole thing, they're going to do a giant-sized special edition podcast where I and several others are going to be joining them to do a full retrospective look back at the highs and lows of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But we want your opinions. We want the opinions of all the listeners out there. So after you've seen Endgame, what you do is you need to rank your Marvel Cinematic Universe movies from 1 through 22 and email that list to nickd@placetobenation.com. That is nickd@placetobenation.com. The full composite ranking for Place to Be Nation will be revealed on the show. So get your ballots in to make sure your voice is heard. They are due by May 16th. That is May 16. But you got to remember, we also have a wrestling feed over PTBN. That's, of course, the bread and butter of Place to Be Nation. And Scott and Nate are back. They're welcoming Andy Atherton in the latest edition of Main Event, and they do a mini great debate before diving into 2 big Okada matches. In the second episode of Row 1, Seat 1, Ben Zaney welcomes Al Getz to talk about visiting MLB stadiums and UFC events, and then brings in Lane to talk the Scenic City Showdown. And of course, a new episode of Talking WCW. Greg, Tim, and Jenny are back and breaking down some stiff as fuck Steiner Brothers matches. Over on the mothership, Justin and Scott brought in John D'Amato and Steve Bennett to deep dive into the build-up for WrestleMania 5. And of course, we can't forget about What If. Greg and Nick are delivering episode 3, exploring a world where Daniel Bryan stays healthy after WrestleMania 30. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, Jeff is back learning wrestling with the road to WrestleMania 6. And we also hear about, all about JT's interesting experience with his grandmother's funeral. Oh, dear God. What are we doing? Then, over at PlaceToBeNation.com, there's PTBN's excellent WWE Network adventure. It's back and running hot as the crew looks at a pair of 1994 episodes of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. That is some great stuff. You guys need to go check out both of these things. And check out our social media pages and message board at www.bigelow34.proboards.com for information on joining our GWWE and TV match ever project. Get in on the conversation today and start researching your list. So that is everything that is happening over on Place to Be Nation right now, from the pop to the wrestling feed. There's literally something for everyone.
All right, Russell, that was good. That was comprehensive. That really summed up the Place to Be Nation universe there. Whether you're interested in wrestling, comics, movies, TV, music, candy, funerals, apparently. We got something for everybody, so do feel free to check that out. But right here, right now, we are going to stay focused on the year 1970 in the history of Marvel Comics. And let's focus in on that word Marvel, best known today when we talk about Captain Marvel for, the big movie star herself, much loved, much revered, Carol Danvers. In 1970, Carol Danvers was still a little-seen supporting character and won Mar-Vell, a bland, boring Kree character, was slammed up against Rick Jones, an annoying, irritating human character, and somehow these two unlikable misfits were meant to work together. No surprise, Captain Marvel got canceled in 1970, or at least put on hiatus. No surprise here. What did you think of this move, Russell?
It couldn't have happened to a nicer title.
Mm-hmm. Captain Marvel was going nowhere at this point.
This title's garbage. This title sucks. There's nothing good in it. The artwork sucks. The writing sucks. The characters suck. Why did this make it for this many issues? How did it make it this many issues? I can't imagine anybody in the late 60s or in the 70s picking this book up and saying, yep, this is my jam. The original emo kid, Rick Jones, up there performing like his, I guess this is meant to be in the style of Bob Dylan, but oh my dear God. Rick Jones, just get off the comic book page and go get in therapy, man, because this is not working for me. Nobody wants to read this. Now, I can't imagine anybody actually caring about this, little woe is me, whiny little bitch standing up there singing his poorly written Dylan ripoff tunes. I mean, there's even a panel here where this girl appears to be covering her ears. Obviously it's not that. She's closed her. I'm imagining this in my headcanon that on page 2 of issue 20 that this girl's got her hands over her ears and her eyes shut because she's trying to imagine herself anywhere else here.
I don't know, man. To me, the most interesting thing about this era of Captain Marvel is that Marvel clearly recognizes that something is broken with this character. They would not have revamped him so drastically. You didn't really see that much in the Marvel Pantheon. You saw, they stuck to their guns for the most part on characters. I think the two places you see them kind of doing about face was obviously Daredevil got a visual reimagination after a few issues and would gradually become a little bit darker, a little bit less Spider-Man light. But with Captain Marvel, they jettisoned his original costume. They kicked to the curb most of his supporting cast, and they really went all in on this he's going to share a body with Rick Jones thing. So to me, what's interesting is Marvel feels they have something here, and they want to try to salvage it. I think, honestly, they just want a cosmic hero of some sort. But they definitely swing and miss when they try to reimagine it as the other half of the Rick Jones story.
Yeah, it's a total misfire. This was a mistake. There's potential maybe in the Mar-Vell concept, but it won't be fully realized until Carol Danvers is the one with the powers and we get rid of this guy, because this is never going to work. And after 20 some odd issues of it just going from bad to worse. You couldn't be blamed for just completely giving up on this book. If you were patient enough to make it over 20 issues into Captain Marvel, there's a strong possibility you and I just don't share taste. But you just have to be one seriously patient individual to say, oh, no, I want to wait and see how this plays out. Nope, I think this is a book that has been given ample time to find its voice. Its voice is best described as a caterwaul of the worst order. So hard pass on everything Captain Marvel to this point.
There's a special place in heaven for those who read and enjoyed the first few issues, the first few years of Captain Marvel, because they've obviously already experienced their own personal hell.
That is the definition of long suffering.
Yeah. The less said, the better. Let's talk about two more books and then here. Let's first talk about Incredible Hulk. To kind of relate to what we were just talking about, Captain Marvel, they tinkered with it and weren't able to find something. I would argue that we're finally starting to get closer to a Hulk formula that works. And I think this story that we read for 1970 was kind of typified by the fact that they recognize that there's something to this Hulk Banner dynamic. That almost seems to be the missing ingredient here. They separate them physically in these issues, so you actually have Banner versus Hulk. Once they can figure out how to distill that down a little, make it a little subtler so it's not literally Banner fighting Hulk, but you got that internal struggle going, I think that's when we're going to start to get the first really good Hulk stories. This is a decent Hulk story. It was better than the bad Hulk stories we've read, but I think it's inching closer, and it really all revolves around somebody just hitting it on the head of that. Banner is the hero of the story. Hulk is his nightmare, and they have to figure out a way to coexist. Yeah,
that's where we're getting to with Hulk now. We're finally starting to get close to what people want to see out of this character. Man, you talk about a character who's been long in the development phase of figuring out his place in all this, and his storytelling formula. Again, long-suffering fans, if you've been sticking with this book through all the fits and starts. But I will say this, at least Bruce Banner and the Hulk are far more interesting than Captain Marvel and Rick Jones.
I mean, that's a low bar, Russell.
It's a low bar.
Is that really all we're hoping for? Is that a character is more interesting than Captain Marvel and Rick Jones? Do we not have higher hopes than that?
I used to, but then Silver Age Marvel beat it out of me.
All right. Well, I think that covers what we need to cover as far as Hulk. Let's finish up with the single issue of Avengers that we read for this year. Features the dynamic debut of the Lady Liberators, kind of the debut of Valkyrie. Not really. No. It's Enchantress dressed up as Valkyrie doing a cosplay thing. We got Roy Thomas and his wife in a creepy scene that you guys touched upon how creepy it was, but the less said, the better. And we get the Rutland, Vermont Halloween parade that would become a tradition across both Marvel and DC books. This issue did nothing for me. I'm right there with you. I was like, we read this because it was weird and funny, and because it was the backdoor version of Valkyrie first appearance, even though, as you just said, it's not. The Lady Liberators is actually a concept that I'm kind of on board for. Like I'm absolutely here for that, but it's just, again, concept versus execution. It ain't good. I don't get the Rutland Halloween thing. That's for somebody else. That's for another generation, I guess. It was an inside joke that I wasn't on the inside with. And Hawkeye here is just the absolute dirt worst. The worst.
He sucks so bad. And it's another one of those like unfortunate Avengers issues where we're like, so this does get good eventually, right?
I'm getting so scared. Scared is probably too strong a word, but I've really just been like holding out hope this whole time. I was like, if we can just make it to the Kree Skrull War, we'll be okay. Because that's been my like benchmark of when Avengers gets good. But the more Rick Jones I read, the more Roy Thomas I read, the more this era of Avengers I read, I'm just like, man, I don't. Is this book, which I kind of remember fondly, I have like a Neil Adams signed copy of it on my bookshelf. Is it going to be torn asunder for me? I am kind of living in fear. It's amazing, Russell, if you think about it. We're in a world where Avengers is probably the most beloved pop culture franchise in the world right now. And we're sitting here reading crappy Avengers issues from the 70s.
It is a remarkable change of pace. And also, speaking of like Avengers in the modern era, go check out the Jason Aaron run on Avengers right now.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's actually really great. And more of that kind of Avengers is what we want to see. Go get that shit. But skip this. We'll report back to you as soon as Avengers doesn't suck anymore.
Yeah, we'll get back to you in a few years. I would actually take this is the first time I probably take Tim to task. There's a lot of tease there on why we needed to read this issue. I get it, the Valkyrie thing, the Lady Liberators thing. We're checking in on Avengers, but yeah, man, explaining to do.
Sometimes we need crappy issues to remind us why we love the really good ones. You got to get those turds in there occasionally just to remind you of what the good stuff actually looks like. This ain't, but we'll eventually find the golden nuggets amongst all of this.
There you go. All right, well said, man. And with that said, let's call it a day. Call it a day on 1970. Russell, it's been really fun talking about this transitional year with you.
Yeah, man.
Obviously, you mentioned during the break a lot of the stuff you got going on. Do you want to expand on any of that?
No, we just got, as I said during the live read, we got a ton of stuff going on. There's always more coming down the pipe. So that's going to be your little tease to keep a lookout for a couple of new things happening as certain things come to an end, as I alluded to about one of my other shows. New things are on the horizon. So make sure you guys stick around and look out for that kind of thing.
You know, a wise man once said, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end.
It is indeed closing time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with that, it is closing time. Guys, girls, if you want to converse with me or Russell, you can find us on social media. I am at Ben J. Morse on Twitter. I'm at Ben Morse 882 on Instagram. I talk a lot about comics. You can also join us on the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page. And then, Russell, you're obviously active on social media as well.
Yes, people can hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at Russell_Sellers. It's the same in both places, so you can follow me there and get ready for even more comics talk, where I, on Instagram, spend most of my time reposting pictures that my girlfriend took of us because she's way better at that than I am, and also showing off pictures of the weekly haul of comics that I tend to spend way too much money on.
There you go. All right, man. Thanks for joining me, and everyone who listened, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Be sure to be on the lookout for Marvel Age 1971 Part 1, and then we'll be back here with you, Marvel Age Masterclass, diving into 1971. Till next time, class dismissed.
Consideration paid for by the following.
Place to Be Nations, JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have over 24 podcasts available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We now offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we dive into topics running the gamut from today's WWE to the glory days of yesteryear and the ins and outs of the territory days. In addition to our full-length shows, we also deliver to you special pod blasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is a veritable treasure trove of great content, offering tremendous shows covering the land of movies, television, life, comics, and sports, brought to you by the most knowledgeable and insightful folks in the podcast world.
You can find all these great shows, plus archives of our past podcasts from over the past 8 years as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while you're there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth search projects, and much more. Be sure to support our site by using www.PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping. We want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and TheHistoryOfWrestling.com as well. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture.